Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second Intercontinental Climate Reality webinar. My name is Ethan Spanner. I'm the Climate Policy Advisor for the Climate Reality Project's headquarters in Washington, D.C. This webinar was brought to you by Climate Reality Canada and Climate Reality Australia. It is a prelude to the Ecocity World Summit hosted in Melbourne this year. Today's webinar features Dr. Dani Richter from Citizens Climate Lobby in Washington, D.C., Kirstin Miller from Ecocity Builders in Oakland, California, and Matthew Chapman from the Climate Reality Project Canada in Montreal. We'll have a question and answer session following all three presentations, so please type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of the window, and we'll get to those after all of our panelists have presented. First up will be Dr. Dani Richter. Dr. Dani Richter is the Legislative Director and Director of Research for Citizens Climate Lobby. He joined CCL staff in 2013 after 5 years as a volunteer, completing his PhD in oceanography and getting paid to do scientific research on all 7 continents. We've asked each of our panelists today to begin their presentation by answering one simple question. If you were any city in the world, which would it be and why? So without delay, Dr. Richter, please begin. Which city would you be and why?
Yeah, thanks for that. If I could be any city, I think that I would be the city of San Diego, California. I do have to say I'm a little bit biased as that's where I did my PhD. But what I love about San Diego is that it's right on the coast, and as an oceanographer, there's tons of interesting stuff going on there. There's a lot of really interesting environmental leadership and innovation happening in San Diego, but it's also a city with a little bit of work to do. Particularly, it's a city in the desert, and I think that they could use water a bit better, and I think that I would want to have something to work on, and so that's San Diego. So that's the city that I would like to be. And now you should all be seeing my presentation. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is the way Citizens Climate Lobby is working local, but looking national. So we are an international organization, and this is an intercontinental webinar. And here you can see where we have groups around the world. All those blue pins are active groups, and all those yellow pins are groups in progress. They haven't had a group start yet. And at the bottom, if you want to see this map and find a chapter near you, there's the link at the bottom you can go to. It's just citizensclimatelobby.org/about-ccl/chapters. And if you were to hover over any of those pins, you'll notice we're particularly dense over North America. If you were to hover over any of those pins, you would find the email address of the group leader for that chapter, and you would be able to get in touch with them. So we are an international organization, but I am the legislative director for Citizens Climate Lobby in the United States. And so I'll be talking mostly about the United States CCL operation. But overall, all CCL chapters in any country, we have 2 goals. And goal number 1 is to create the political will for a livable world. To create the political will for a livable world. And the second goal is to empower our volunteers to experience breakthroughs in exercising their personal and political power. To empower our volunteers to experience breakthroughs in exercising their personal and political power. I'll talk a little bit more about those in just a second, but I want to go through the rest of the slide real quick. All of our volunteers are focusing on one policy, which is passage of carbon fee and dividend. We believe this to be the best first step to a livable world, not the only step, not the last step, the best first step. And all our volunteers follow one rule, and that is that if you can't express appreciation and respect for your elected officials, then you can't call yourself CCL. So let me get back to those goals, creating the political will for a livable world. To me, this is creating with that. If you sign on to CCL, you're accepting responsibility for creating something new. It's not easy to create political will. You're not looking to shuffle around political will on the table. You are looking to create new political will, and you're willing to do what it takes to bring that new piece on to the political chessboard. And what is it that we're going for? We're going for a livable world. So some people see CCL and how committed we are to carbon fee and dividend, and they think that that's what we exist for. And no, we exist for a livable world. Once we get carbon fee and dividend passed, we will continue to do what we're doing. until we get that livable world. And then the empowerment of our volunteers, that's really important. This is something that I think a lot of people can forget, even volunteers of CCL, but we're really here for our volunteers. We have over 70,000 people in our network. We only have 27 staff spread around the country for those 70,000 people. And that's the way it should be, because what we're doing is we're really trying to get our volunteers to experience breakthroughs. And I like to think of what they're breaking through as their comfort zone. We're here to push you outside of your comfort zone. We're trying to get you to exercise your power in a way that you're comfortable with, because we think that's where we're going to need to be to create that political will for a livable world. So that's a quick rundown on CCL. And I want to talk a little bit more about our policy, because I think that that's important. That's what we're trying to make happen on the federal level. But the way we're doing it in most instances, almost all the time, is by focusing locally. So carbon fee and dividend can be explained pretty quickly, pretty simply. The plan includes a carbon tax or fee of $15 per ton of CO2 equivalent, which increases by $10 per ton per year. 100% of the revenue is returned back to households as a monthly dividend. And there is a border carbon adjustment. And the purpose of the border carbon adjustment is to make sure that producers, manufacturers have no incentive to relocate to a more permissive or more polluting regime. So it's not to punish anybody, it's just to make sure there's no incentive to emit more CO2. So that's the plan that we're focusing on, trying to get passed on the federal level. And when you look at this plan, we've had a couple of studies done, and one of those studies focusing on the macroeconomics found that in the United States, over 20 years, this plan would create 2.8 million net jobs. So that's accounting for the jobs that we would lose. And that's mostly because investment shifts from capital-intensive industries, like mining, to labor-intensive industries, like sales, like auto manufacturing, and especially like healthcare, which accounts for 1/6 of the US economy. And the example I like to give, it can cost $1 million to drill a single exploratory dry oil well. Think how many nurses could be hired for that $1 million. So that's what we're doing. When people have money in their pockets from the dividend, they tend to spend it on things like getting better. The United States economy would be $1.375 trillion larger, this study found. There would be 227,000 avoided premature deaths as a result of this policy, and carbon emissions at the end of 20 years would be 50% of their 1990 levels. So again, not where we ultimately need to get, but the best first step towards getting there. And so in the organizational context, what have we accomplished? In 2017, year to date, we have had 936 Member of Congress, MOC, meetings. We have published 295 op-eds, so that's better than one per day. We have published 1,732 letters to the editor. We've had 1,780 outreach events, and most of those are local, of course. All of those are going to be local. And we have 418 chapters, active chapters. There are two other things which unfortunately are not showing up here, and I'm not sure if I can get them to show up. There we go. The Climate Solutions Caucus is a group, a bipartisan group of Republicans and Democrats. That's now up to 48, an equal number of Democrats and Republicans in the House. We have 20 Republican co-sponsors of House Resolution 195, which says that climate change is real, humans have had an impact, and Congress should do something about it. So that's what we're achieving on the federal level. But how we do that is really focusing locally. And in Citizens Climate Lobby, we like to talk about the 5 levers of political will. Number 1 is lobbying. Number 2 is chapter development. Number 3 is media. Number 4 is grassroots. And number 5 is grass tops. And if we're talking about cities, that really falls into the grass tops lever. And so I'm just going to talk a little bit more about how we're approaching that, how we're making it easier for Republicans in the United States to say climate change is real, humans have had an impact, and Congress, me, I should do something about it. So the way we do that is we're doing that through our endorsers program. And in particular, on this webinar, our volunteers are going around getting state, county, and city resolutions. And there are 2 kinds of resolutions. One resolution is for carbon fee and dividend, expressing support for the federal policy. And the second endorsement is for climate action more generally. So it tracks pretty closely that HRES 195. Again, 21 Republicans saying climate change is real, humans have had an impact, and Congress should do something about it. And for a lot of those members on both the caucus and on the resolution, the reason they were able to do that is because their local politicians said, this is something that we endorse. So here, this is just the top page of this on our website, and you can see that the state legislature of California, with 12% of the total population of the United States, has endorsed carbon fee and dividend. They have 55 members of Congress. Again, 1 out of every 9 Americans lives in California, and the state legislature, California, passed into law a resolution saying that carbon fee and dividend was a good thing to do on the federal level. So that's the state level. But then we also have all of these municipal resolutions which are calling for carbon fee and dividend. And so this is, again, on our website. You can see Philadelphia, San Francisco, the county of Essex, New Jersey, Portland, Pittsburgh, and this goes on. And you can see on the right, some of these are not all Democratic members of Congress who are represented by these cities. You have Rodney Frelinghuysen in New Jersey. You have Stephen Pierce in New Mexico. There are others. And our experience has been that when Republican members of Congress see that local mayors, local chambers of commerce, local city councils, local county boards, when they see that they are behind this policy, they feel like they have the political capital behind them, the political will, where they can be really where they've wanted to be for a long time on climate, and they can be a real climate leader. So what are some conclusions here? First of all, CCL is everywhere, and if you are interested, you should check out our website and see if there's a chapter near you. We're also betting the ranch on relationships, and that gets back to our one rule of appreciation and respect. If you can't find something you respect and appreciate about your member of Congress or anybody you're meeting with, you can't call yourself CCL. We believe that carbon fee and dividend is the best first step to a livable world, not the last step, not the only step, the best first step. And we are focused on affecting national policy, but really we're working locally in our districts, in our cities to make that happen. And the grass tops lever through our endorsements program is one of the most effective things that anyone can do to create political will on the national level. And so that is it for my presentation, and I will turn it back to Ethan.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Richter, for that rundown on the nexus between local action and national impact, as well as CCL's incredible outreach and dedicated volunteers. The next segment will be presented by Kirstin Miller. Kirstin Miller leads the Ecocity Builders program development, global initiatives, and activities. She works locally and internationally to help cities access Ecocity knowledge and specializes in integrating city-based experiences from a diverse range of perspectives. She is an international speaker and presenter on Ecocity design, technology, development, and citizen participation. Kirstin will be presenting on the concept of neighborhood ecologies, ecocity systems, and open source urban systems. And she's also in Melbourne right now. Take it away, Kirstin. Tell us about which city you would be.
The organizations are doing. And so it's a real honor to be included in this panel. And as Ethan mentioned, I just arrived in Melbourne yesterday, where the 12th Ecocity World Summit is launching tomorrow with an anticipated 1,000 delegates from 30 countries, and with a much anticipated keynote presentation by Al Gore. So to answer your question, Ethan, if I was a city, I would be Oakland, California, which is nice because that's where I live. And because I'm really interested in learning about diverse points of view and where people are coming from and why. And I like being near both ocean and mountains at the same time. So next slide, please. So in this presentation, I want to talk about neighborhood ecologies and open source urbanism from the point of view of both myself personally and through the core principles and practices of the nonprofit I work with, Ecocity Builders. whose mission is to help rebuild cities for the long-term health of human and natural systems. So a little background on the Ecocity movement. It started around the mid-1970s with an artist and peace activist named Richard Register and his Berkeley, California associates who called themselves urban ecologists. And at that time, in the 1970s, global warming was still a theory being discussed in a few universities. And the internet was still pretty much a project of the US Department of Defense. So now 4 decades later, computers are pretty much universal, and 3 in 7 people on the planet have mobile phones, and climate change is a full-blown global reality. So in this presentation, I want to put forward that the core principles of the first generation of urban ecologists from the 1970s are still valid and, in fact, foundational to our future success as a civilization on a planet of cities. But however, in order to support this, what some are calling the great transition to a new ecology of the economy, we need to, as Dani was talking about, continue to innovate, work locally, build our social networks. So far, we have not been building ecologically healthy cities, and now, as we all know, the way we build and live has to change dramatically in order to avoid the irreversible destabilization of our atmosphere and our biosphere. But at the same time, we have to deal with these tremendous challenges. We're also at the same time witnessing an era of unprecedented technological change, which some are calling the fourth industrial revolution. And this revolution is underpinned by rapid advances in artificial intelligence, robotics, and the Internet of Things, to name a few. So what does this new digital era mean for local economies? Next slide. So it probably will mean another big shift in the job market. And this digital era is characterized by the shift to an economy based largely on information computerization. Next slide. Economic globalization, which is also happening hand in hand with this emergence of this new digital era, is enabling the fragmentation and decentralization of complex production chains and is accelerating a worldwide dispersal of the different segments of these chains. So how is this new digital era and economic globalization with this decentralization theme going to change the shape of cities and the shape of our economy? Next slide, please. It's being predicted that with the rise of these new platform technologies and scenarios, like those we just saw in the previous slide, there will be a dramatic result in a decline in the cost of distance that will in turn change where people choose to live. So in other words, things will likely be manufactured and distributed closer to where the buyer lives. And so jobs, local jobs, including end manufacturing and assembly, will likely be less centralized and more distributed, more local. So people will be able to base their location more on lifestyle preferences and urban amenities instead of just proximity to a central office or a factory. So cities and suburbs then will have to compete and contend not only with more attractive rural and ex-urban developments outside of what's now traditional commuter belts, but also with other cities that are offering better quality of life. Next slide. So this is actually good news because the elements and features that distinguish healthy, prosperous, and happy cities, which include compact urban design, walkability, clean air, clean water, access to nutritious food, good education, good health care, green spaces, etc., are the same characteristics of low carbon, healthy eco-cities and healthy neighborhood ecologies. So I'd like to just emphasize that the neighborhood is really the nexus of integration of urban systems and these new technologies within an area that represents the center of a citizen's life radius. And that life radius is the 20 or so mile area where most people spend 80% of their time. And so, as such, this is a great starting point for urban transformation that is based on citizen participation. Next slide, please. So back to the core idea of the first generation of urban ecologists from the 1970s. Their main idea was this fusion of urban planning, ecology, and public participation to help design and build healthier cities. So this still holds true, but now needs to advance alongside these new technologies and innovations that are being integrated and embedded into both our economy and our social fabric with the rise of these digital era technologies. So as the next generation of urban ecologists, we believe that we need to practice a sort of open source urbanism, which allows participants, citizens, to adapt and modify practices based on open data and information and shaped by very specific needs that are in alignment with community goals for health and improving quality of life. So add to this new renewable energy and energy storage technologies, these distributed systems that are coming, and these new platform technologies like supply chain and customization with 3D printing, open source manufacturing, last mile delivery, telehealth and virtual medicine, and then also these very interesting crypto finance and governance disruptors like blockchain technology. All of these coming advancements with this fourth industrial era should allow more people to participate at the local level. So next slide, please. So I'm going to end with 8 steps to Ecocities and ecology of the new energy economy. And these are the 8 things that we found, Ecocity builders and our partners, that in general, successful implementations of sustainable urbanism often do most or all of these following 8 things. And within Ecocity builders, we're attempting to group these steps under a peer-to-peer urbanism initiative that we're calling Urbansight, and which we've now piloted in 10 countries and 12 cities. Next slide, please. So the first step is understanding the city as a regional urban ecosystem. So this is, again, put forward by the first generation of urban ecologists, that cities are ecosystems like a forest or a savanna, except that they're constructed and maintained by humans. Energy and material flows are part of a city's urban metabolism, and it's a way to link urban ecologies and economies. If a city is to ultimately become sustainable and thrive, it has to be healthy as a whole and sustain its resource stocks and sheds. Next slide. Another step that we found is important is to assess conditions and urban metabolism resource flows. So today, urban infrastructure projects are typically of a supply nature. So that is, they're focused on the supply of a service rather than a reduction in the demand for a service. So this could typically encourage excessive use rather than efficient use of a service, which is counter to sustainable development. So for example, building many more roads actually usually encourages more traffic instead of reducing it. So our approach to sustainable development, we believe, should involve first reducing the demand and then providing efficient and effective supply. And these tools to assess resource flows and urban metabolism are a key to figuring out how to best provide the demand reduction and then the efficient supply. Next slide, please. So we feel that it's critically important to use ubiquitous standards and measures for evaluation and prioritization, because we're all human beings, no matter where we live. Since we are human beings, we all need the same basic things: safe, affordable housing, clean air, clean water, nutritious food, education, good governance, and a sense of well-being and purpose. Depending on the place where we live, the form and delivery of these services will vary depending on climate, culture, economy, and other characteristics. So we in Ecocity Builders have been working on defining a basic level of what these standards and measures would look like, and we've been testing them with various pilot cities. But we're looking for indicators that are universally applicable but locally adaptable. Next slide. So another important thing is mapping objectives to challenges. And here's some pictures of partners that we work with in Cairo, Egypt. City and community projects will only really succeed in the goal of solving the underlying problem if the objective is carefully mapped to the challenge. So part of the process is to figure out what are the real issues at the core, what deliverables does everyone expect, what criteria are going to be used to judge the success or failure, who has a stake in the outcome, and how do various stakeholder goals differ. So to sort of start that conversation at the very beginning is critical. Next slide, please. And in order to enable more rapid transformation and scaling, the policy piece is so important. And this slide has some examples that we found are working. So I guess at the core of the policy piece, policies that are sectoral and not holistic don't benefit the city as much as a whole, and don't move the entire city dial towards sustainability. So we're finding partnership approaches work really well, and they need to be encouraged and should include citizens and local businesses in the process to be successful. Next slide. So as an educational nonprofit organization, we really believe that the crux of the success is in educating ourselves and sharing knowledge with each other. And that as this digital age evolves, that education also must evolve, because a lot of the things that we're educating people for in today's institutions are probably things that artificial intelligence or robots can do better. So we need to emphasize and educate people in a way that is more creative and participatory in order to find our roles and to really shape our futures together. And we in Ecocity Builders we're emphasizing educational pathways and methods that emphasize a participatory action research framework. So that is a framework that seeks to understand and improve the world by changing it, kind of like Dani was talking about earlier. It's a collective, self-reflective inquiry that the researchers and the participants undertake together so that they can understand it and improve upon their local ecologies and economies. So the process is directly linked to action, and it's influenced by understanding the history, the culture, and the local context, and is embedded in social relationships. And I included just a few snapshots of places where we're implementing this type of approach through our Urban Insight initiative with our educational process called the Eco Compass. Next slide, please. And then it's important to customize solutions to fit the city's unique situation. Like I said earlier, we all need the same sorts of conditions, but the expression of those vary according to the economy, the climate, demographics, the resources available. But once we find something that's working at the neighborhood scale, it's something that can be replicated in other neighborhoods that are similar and adapted more rapidly. So we're finding this bottom-up approach is particularly useful in transforming cities from the bottom up, from the neighborhood to city scale. Next slide. And then finally, it's important to continue to share out the knowledge and to monitor and track progress. And these different monitoring frameworks, we have our Ecocity standards that we're using, but also enabling ways to visualize this data and information through open source platforms we find is really important. So using geographic information systems and mapping, I think, is a springboard to having a more whole systems understanding that a citizen can really grasp at the local level. So next slide, please. So just to end, Ecocity Builders has different tools and training that we're happy to share with you. You can find out more at ecocitybuilders.org. And finally, I just want to thank everybody for joining the webinar. And if you're in Melbourne, please stop by our booth at Ecocity World Summit. We're booth number 10. So looking forward to that. Thank you. That's my presentation.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Kirstin. That's certainly a positive and sustainable future for us to make a reality. I will once again promote the submission of questions for our panelists, which you can submit in the Q&A box at the bottom of your presentation window. Our final panelist is Matthew Chapman of the Climate Reality Project Canada. Matthew joined the Climate Reality Project in Canada as National Campaign Coordinator just over a year ago, collaborating with a national coalition focused on raising ambition for the Pan-Canadian Framework on Climate Change. His experience in the field of fine arts, education, and international business have shaped his understandings of the challenges and opportunities our society and civilization face. He believes that citizens are given too little credit in our political systems, and that authentic public engagement is an essential ingredient for the emergence of a sustainable, carbon-neutral economy. Without further ado, Matt, please give us your ideal city to be and roll right into your presentation.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me on. And I'll follow suit with what Dani and Kirstin have done, and I'll choose a city that I am very intimately familiar with, and understandably so, but Montreal, having lived in about half a dozen other cities and almost as many careers behind me. I find Montreal challenging, as Dani mentioned. A place that has so much potential but needs a little push. It was, to give you some idea, one of the last places in the country to ban smoking indoors. So we've got a real passion for the joie de vivre and culture, and don't step on my my way of life kind of mentality in Montreal, which is beautiful, and which gives rise to beautiful art and culture and circus for anybody who's seen Cirque du Soleil. But it causes some difficulties when we want to make a major transition like this, and to get people to shift some of their habits and adopt new ones isn't always evident. So I'd say Montreal, for all of the reasons, the potential that it has, the art that it has, and the proximity to nature as well. I mean, we have what you might call a mountain in the middle of the city for anybody who's been here, and we also we have beautiful. It's an island, so we're surrounded by water. So anywhere you go, you can end up at the waterfront. Right, so I'll jump in. Thank you again for being with us. And a little bit about Climate Reality. We're an organization that's been around for about 11 years, and Al Gore started it with his movie, The Inconvenient Truth, An Inconvenient Truth, rather. That will be reprised, or a sequel is coming out this summer. So if you are around, you can check that out in, I believe, theaters across the world, just at the end of July in the United States, in the end of this month, rather, and a little bit later on in other countries. The primary activity of Climate Reality is to train ambassadors for the climate. Anybody who's willing to take a step out in their community and say, I care about this enough to make a statement about it. I care about it enough to go public with my conviction that we need to transition to a sustainable economy. This is the organization that you might be interested in having a hand in building. And to do so, you can apply for trainings that happen across the world, but most frequently in the United States. So you can check that out, climaterealityproject.org. And in Montreal, I'm also kind of representing the Montreal Climate Coalition right now, because the coalition is an example of how ambassadors that are trained in a big setting like these Climate Reality trainings can then take action in their local cities. And I'll get into a little bit more about what that means in a moment, but I'm an active part of the Montreal Climate Coalition. And I'd like to take us through 4 pieces of today's presentation. Local action in your country. How do you go about determining what's happening? And then that provides a springboard for, well, what's needed. So a snapshot of local action in Canada is what I'll be giving you, but you can take it and adapt the approach that we've taken for kind of taking a census of what's happening in our country and apply it to wherever you live. Secondly, a convergence of catalyzing factors. Why is now the moment to move local and to get active at the local level and to be really community building? We'll look at some of the factors that are aligning. Thirdly, the Community Climate Hub Initiative. What is Climate Reality Project proposing to its members in Canada? And it's very similar to a program that is happening also in the United States. And some of our international branches, of which there are 10, are also looking towards okay, let's focus on community building, let's focus on local initiatives, let's focus on municipal governments, what's the role there. So we'll look at this initiative that has just kind of seen the light of day in the last couple of months in Canada, and that will continue to grow over the next few years. Finally, a case study of the Montreal Climate Coalition, if we have time. Keeping an eye on the clock here, and actually I want to make sure that we've got ample time for questions as well. So that said, taking a census of what's happening in your country, what we decided to do is, first of all, how many local governments are there in Canada? We figured out that there are 3,600 or so. What percentage of them have set a reduction target? And this is an easy number to find. If you're in a country that has a strong organization like the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, then they facilitate this kind of research significantly. And we've determined that less than 5% of our municipalities have set a GHG reduction target. So that might be surprising. There's a whole bunch of tiny little municipalities, of course, and most of the large ones have set a target, but it gives you an idea of the work there is left to do. And before you start a campaign, you always want to know that there's a reason for your campaign, and so this is part of the rationale. Only 0.6% have adopted the UN Compact of Mayors, which is an international agreement among mayors of large cities, again, so it's not every city that has even the opportunity to sign that. And then finally, how many of them have committed to 100% renewable energy by 2050? And that number falls at the moment at 0.08%. With 3 municipalities in Canada taking the step forward, 2 rather large cities, Vancouver and Victoria, and then a very small rural county called Oxford County. So is there room for improvement? We hope the answer is yes. And when you do this kind of analysis in your country, you'll be able to, I hope, come to the same conclusion. There's lots of room for improvement, so let's get started. I'll jump over this. That's fine. Catalyzing factors, economic factors that are converging to create an opportunity here to act. Financial factors in Canada, at least, and you'll have to kind of fill in the gaps for your respective countries. Technological factors that are applicable to all of us because these technologies are available online. I'll mention them in a moment. Scientific catalyzing factors. We have a consensus that is unprecedented, you know, in scientific literature, practically, but certainly increasingly. Increasingly, we're seeing that, and societal catalyzers. So I'll start off with economic catalyzers. We've got cities recognizing that fossil fuel consumption and a car kind of based development is costly. I'll leave these just on the screen briefly, and if you'd like to dig into them, you can do so by Googling suburban sprawl. The Cost of Sprawl is the name of that study produced by by Smart Prosperity. Or Sustainable Prosperity, as it was previously known. They do wonderful work looking at eco-fiscal measures to right the balance between what we're paying to live the wasteful and high polluting lifestyles that we live and what we should be paying. So how to integrate the cost of pollution into its production. Secondly, financial catalyzers in Canada, at least, and this is where you're going to have to go do some digging in your respective countries. We have a Federation of Canadian Municipalities that offers significant grants to local initiatives and municipalities that are willing to take action on climate change. And that can take the shape of developing a climate plan, that can take the shape of building a completely 100% renewable library or a waste management facility that reduces greenhouse gas emissions. So there are literally tens of millions, and I believe they have hundreds of millions in an endowment that they disperse these funds from on an annual basis. So in Canada, we have this wonderful opportunity to take advantage of that. Technological catalyzers, free online collaborative tools that now, unlike ever before, allow citizens to take the lead. And this is really, really key. It's no longer only those, there's no longer a barrier to entry where you must afford Salesforce before you can get active in your community and really mobilize people effectively. You no longer need to pay for IBM to come in and say, okay, here's how we're going to set up the servers in order to provide you with the support that you need. No, everything's online and it is free as long as you work within the constraints sometimes that freeware puts on you. But it's very possible, and we've built the Climate Hub campaign that I'll get to in a moment around this idea that all of the tools we're using to build the campaign are open source and free for everyone to use, which is really, really important. Fourthly, the scientific consensus on climate change. We're very fortunate in Canada to have 70 researchers from across the country, both geographically and in terms of disciplines. They've come together and put forward the 10 best solutions at the federal level for acting on climate change. So having that kind of scientific consensus and having a really strong foundation of researchers to back up this the imperative for action, both at the global level and, of course, at the federal level here in Canada, is very valuable and offers us a significant hand up when it comes to demanding, urgent action. Finally, and I'll tip my hat to Dani and the Citizens Climate Lobby. Faith-based statements on climate change is one example of the social catalyzers of diverse people groups coming together and saying, you know, I'm from a vulnerable country, I have a reason to care about climate change, or I'm from a faith group and I have a moral obligation to care about climate change, or I'm from a professional group and you know, engineers stand to gain immensely if our country takes climate change seriously, rather than mires us in technologies of the past. So with that, with those catalyzers in mind, I'll take you through quickly to our campaign, the Climate Hub campaign, and I've got just a couple of minutes here, so I'll go very quickly, and I apologize for the breakneck speed, but do want to have time for questions. Climate Hubs are, as you can imagine, local, citizen-driven, and importantly, diverse. Their objectives are to advance municipalities along ICLEI, the International Association for Local Governments, milestone framework. You can see it there on your screen. Create an inventory if you haven't done it yet. Set a target to reduce those emissions. Develop a plan to achieve the target. Implement the local plan, and then monitor progress and you kind of start again. Go back to one, do another inventory, see where you're at, etc. So as we're having some of our interns here in the office work on a humorous song called Measure, Plan, Reduce, Repeat. That is a bit of a remake of a popular techno song. So we're putting that together, and we're excited to have that released in about 2 months' time. A roadmap of a typical hub. What does it look like exactly on the ground? Holding city and neighborhood level public consultations to decide kind of what the best solutions are for our city. And we have resources that we provide to hubs to help them do that. Mobilizing diverse communities to participate in those consultations. A public consultation is only as powerful as the representative nature of its participants. So if you've only got the same bandwidth of the population participating, then you're not going to have the same kind of political clout as if you go really wide and diverse. Thirdly, uniting voices around key structural solutions. So not allowing people to go off in all sorts of directions, but saying, okay, we all have different individual needs, but what key structural solutions can we all agree upon? And that makes it a lot easier for politicians to implement those structural solutions. And Kirstin kind of made reference to them earlier. Following up to ensure implementation, of course, of the recommendations that stem from the consultation, and then sharing successes with other municipalities, which is really key. We have places in Canada, as I mentioned, that are on their way to 100% renewable, and other places that are nowhere near there. So being able to take the lessons learned and accelerate others along the way is very helpful. Here are some of the tools that we've developed to help hubs, regular webinars that I'll just mention in a moment and invite you to, a partner database of organizations, sympathetic organizations across the country that they can reach out to. A local hub in their community can say, hey, there's 10 other eco groups in our community, or there are 10 other enterprises that sell eco technology. They would be logical partners for our hub. They can help us, come around these common solutions and ensure their implementation. So I won't get into the rest of it there. One of the final things that we're adding in terms of value as a national organization to these local groups on the ground is a benchmarking process. And that benchmarking process is under development, and the first iteration of the benchmarking will take place in spring of next year. So I won't get into the details, but it does resemble very similarly Kirstin's process, and I'll definitely be having a longer conversation with her about that a little bit later. Now, we won't have time to get into the case study, but I will mention the things that have, after doing this whole hub kind of process, after going through that whole holding a consultation, bringing in diverse actors, et cetera, these are the things that in our city of Montreal came to the fore as the top 4 recommendations that we're putting forward in Montreal and that we're really pushing for the city to adopt. And that is a carbon budget. So if you're not familiar with carbon budgets, take a look into that. Some of the work being done out of the Stockholm Resilience Center and other research institutions in, I believe it's also in Sweden. Annual GHG inventories, which they've agreed to now, which is great. A climate test, passing every investment decision through tests to that to ensure that it coincides with the goals that the city has set for itself in terms of reduction. And finally, democratic participation. So participatory budgeting comes into that, and open governance, transparency, open data, all of that kind of falls in there. So I'll leave it at that. For now, I will just finish on this slide here, which invites you to attend subsequent webinars that we're holding. 3 coming up in French tomorrow, another one late in August about carbon neutral organic waste management, and then we'll be announcing our summer series, our fall series of webinars later in August. So if you'd like to find out more, if you'd like to kind of watch how this campaign evolves and maybe replicate it in your country, or take pieces, take inspiration, that would be great. And of course, if you have, if you've already been through, the process we're going through, and you'd like to provide input and suggestions, then we are very much open to that as well. You can reach us through the climatehub.ca website. Thank you so much. Sorry for taking a little bit too much time.
It's no problem, Matt. Thank you again. It's great to be associated with you as part of Climate Reality, and you've shown some of the things that make Climate Reality Canada such an innovative and impactful branch. So we're going to go right into questions now. The first question is from Kathy Orlando. It says, many cities previously supported the Kyoto Protocol. Are cities officially supporting the Paris Accord in Canada, USA, Australia, and other countries? Is an organization facilitating this action? I will go ahead and let whoever would like to take that begin.
Good question. I guess I'm better positioned than the others. I'm not sure if, Kirstin, did you want to? No, okay.
No, please go ahead. Thanks.
Okay. Yep. So I can say that from our perspective, I did see that 331 mayors or so that was mentioned as they are stepping up to support the Paris Agreement. And in Canada, to my knowledge, we have not explicitly gone door to door basically and said, are you in support of the agreement? If I understood the question correctly, but again, we're not in a country that has the same kind of federal challenges as the US does at the moment.
Dani, did you want to speak to the US, or otherwise I can touch on it a bit?
Why don't you go ahead, Ethan? I'm not too up to date on what cities are doing for Paris.
Sure. Well, the first thing to know is that immediately after President Trump announced that the US would withdraw from the Paris Agreement, he made the statement that he was elected to serve the citizens of Pittsburgh, not Paris. Well, Pittsburgh's mayor immediately got on Twitter, said he supports the Paris Agreement, and within a few days announced that Pittsburgh would go 100% renewable electricity by, I believe, 2035. There's also a number of municipalities that have signed on to the U.S. Compact of Mayors, and they have supported the Paris Agreement. And then at the state level, the U.S. Climate Alliance has about a dozen states and territories of the U.S. now, I believe, who are pledging to pool together and meet the U.S.'s commitment, or at least definitely try. And there's some research going on about that right now. The next question is from an anonymous viewer. It's a question for Kirstin. How do we move toward open data and open source urbanism? That's a big question, but if you could briefly touch on it, that would be great.
Hi. Well, we are experimenting with just that within Ecocity Builders, and how we're working towards that is to implement a peer-to-peer knowledge sharing approach through working hand in hand with an educational institution. So we have put together a step-by-step process to start collecting this data and information, requesting it from wherever it's located, which is different depending on each city. So it could be through municipal government, a utility, service provider, but where there are gaps in the data, we form a process to collect it from the ground up. So that means going neighborhood by neighborhood to do sampling in order to get the picture of what's working and what's not working in that neighborhood, and to share out that data on an open platform. So using a shared data protocol that we're happy to talk more about with anybody who's interested in that through just contacting me at Ecocity Builders, Kirstin at ecocitybuilders.org. But there, it's sort of breaking down the silos of data and information, sharing it through an open platform, and then visualizing it, we find through mapping spatially is very effective. But it is a big question. I'd be happy to break it down for anybody who's more interested by contacting me about that.
Okay, thank you very much, Kirstin. I'm going to set one up for Dr. Richter here. It's from Richard Smith. It says, why did we move away from advocating for a carbon permit auction modeled after other pollution permits that cut pollution at the lowest cost to a carbon tax, which will have the result of creating a deadweight loss?
Hi, Richard. Thanks for that question. Yeah, I think that there are really three reasons why we moved away from that. One is politics, one is experience, and I was writing in the text. The third one is, I think, a growing consensus among experts. So I'll start with the growing consensus among experts. As someone who's concerned about climate, I'm convinced by the experts who say, 97% of whom say, based on the evidence, climate change is happening, humans have had an impact, and we should do something about it. And similarly, economists, generally speaking, express a preference for a carbon tax above a cap. They both basically do the same thing. So the deadweight loss, that's going to be the same for a cap or a tax. You're putting a price on carbon. And so if somebody's paying, you're going to have that deadweight loss either way. So that growing consensus is important. I think on the politics, it's become increasingly clear that Republicans really don't like the idea of a cap, they see it as capping their freedom. Whereas a carbon tax, even though they don't like taxes, if it's revenue neutral, then they can start to get behind it from an ideological perspective. And I think on experience, while there are many things that people do like about the cap and trade systems that have been implemented around the world, I think ultimately they have fallen short of their vision and of their promise. And I think that a lot of people are wanting to move to something else. And in particular, with a cap, you have to get that cap right. And if you don't get it right, you can have an oversubscribed auction, and the permits don't end up being worth very much. And it really is the price that drives the emissions reductions, not the cap. So I think experience, I think growing consensus of experts, and I think the politics have all contributed towards that shift.
Okay, thank you very much. And then one final quick question, because this was asked more than once. There are many questions about how citizens can gain access to funds and resources, etc., to provide solutions for sustainable cities and neighborhoods, and things to help them take action.
Great. Well, I can speak briefly to the Canadian context, and I mean, unfortunately, you're going to have to kind of look at how that translates into your own cities, your own countries. But in Canada, the federal government does have a program that offers financing to municipalities. So a citizen group needs to partner then with a municipality. You need to have one or two councillors on board to help you as a local group apply for funds that can help you build a project, a tangible project, or that can help you create a plan, a climate action plan. So that's one of the ways. I don't know if Kirstin wants to speak to another.
Yeah, just briefly, it really depends on the location, where you are, who you have access to request funds, but also there's a lot you can do with very little money. And we're finding that in some of the places where we're working, for example, I'll just give the example of Cusco in Peru. The communities are taking action largely with very little to almost no capital resources. They did an investigation, and they're tackling the issue of waste management by developing community composting. And they designed and built the compost models themselves. They used low-cost materials or found materials or repurposed. They trained each other and got together and helped design and build them in different neighborhoods using different materials depending on availability. And they're looking at different models to sustain these types of projects by, for example, selling the compost in a local market. But that's just one very small example of something that is tangible, you know, feet on the ground, a solution that doesn't require a large grant or donation or, you know, a lot of money from another source.
Okay, thanks very much. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I apologize that there were a couple questions we didn't get to, but thank you for being with us. And a special thanks to our speakers, Dr. Dani Richter, Kirstin Miller, and Matthew Chapman. We hope you've come away with knowledge and inspiration to effectively campaign for a modern, sustainable community in your city or jurisdiction. And during this webinar, we discussed the example of the carbon fee and dividend and taking local action to push the national narrative, the role of accelerating technology and fresh ideas for smart, modern eco-cities, an example of the power of citizens to move the needle at the local level. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I hope you learned a lot. And we have been doing these webinars at an increasing pace. We don't have another date yet, but thank you for tuning in. You will hear from us soon. We will be posting the recording of the webinar sometime soon. And we hope to see you again soon. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye all.